This is an amazing video that explains software. Let's watch it together. This video is so good because it breaks down software into these for simple categories and then gives you actual examples of software that fit into each category. So let us go through the 4 categories one by one and see some examples of software for each category. So the first type of software is what this video calls infrastructure software, which is basically software that other software depends on in order to function. And so this software typically runs on servers. It's not something that you or I would typically interact with directly as users. Instead, other software that we do use depends on this infrastructure software. In the video, they give the example of DNS, which stands for Domain Name System. So when you try to visit a website like Facebook.com, your computer doesn't actually know where that website is hosted. So it asks this question to a DNS server. And the DNS server knows where Facebook is hosted and tells your computer, hey, you need to go over here to this IP address to be able to find Facebook. So without DNS, it'd be very difficult for us to navigate the internet because we wouldn't be able to remember all of these different IP addresses. So instead we use these domain names, and DNS translates those domain names to IP addresses. That's just one example of infrastructure software. Another one that they mentioned was something called Bind, which is a software that allows you to run your own DNS server. And then they also talk about other types of infrastructure software like databases and message brokers, things that a lot of other software depends on, but that you and I as users probably do and interact with directly. The second category of software that this video talks about is something that they call tool software. And this is basically software that helps other software developers build other software. And so this isn't necessarily software that you or I as users will interact with directly, but rather it's software that enables other people to build software that we can then use. An example that they give is something called Android Studio, which is the integrated development environment for Android. So if you want to develop an Android application, you would use Android Studio. And there are a lot of different tools inside of Android Studio that help you develop your software. There's a code editor, there's a debugger, there's a build automation tool, and there's even an emulator where you can test out your application. Then they also give another example of a code repository manager like GitHub. And this is basically a place where software developers can upload their source code, and then other people can view it, can comment on it, can even contribute to it if they want to. And GitHub makes this whole process very easy and efficient. So again, these are 2 examples of tool software, Android Studio and GitHub, which are not necessarily software that you and I as users will interact with directly, but rather it's software that enables other people to build software that we can then use. Okay, so the third category of software that this video talks about is something that they call framework software. And this is basically software that provides a foundation or a structure for building other software. So unlike infrastructure software, framework software is usually something that you or I as users will interact with directly. For example, in React, you could use the Create React app to create a new single-page application very easily. And then once you have that application set up, you can start building your software on top of it. Or another example that they gave in the video was Android, which is a framework for building mobile applications. And there are a lot of different components to Android-like activities, services, broadcast receivers, content providers. These are all different components that work together to form a mobile application. And again, you or I as users may not interact with these components directly, but other people can build applications using these components. And then finally, the fourth category of software that this video talks about is something that they call runtime software. And this is basically software that you or I as users will interact with directly. This is the type of software that we're probably most familiar with. We've probably used all of these types of software. Some examples that they gave in the video were web browsers like Chrome or Firefox, Microsoft Office, and mobile applications like Instagram or TikTok. And the key characteristic of runtime software is that it is typically something that you or I, as users, will interact with directly. So now that we've gone through all of these for categories, I thought it would be fun to play a little game. So I've written down 12 different pieces of software on this piece of paper, and I'm going to remove 4 of them. And then the remaining 8 pieces of software should hopefully fall into these 4 categories that we just talked about. All right, so let's do this. The 4 pieces of software that I'm removing are PuTTY, Elasticsearch, Kubernetes, and Ansible. Hopefully those 4 pieces of software are all infrastructure software. So let us take a look at the 8 remaining pieces of software and figure out which category they fall into. All right, so the first piece of software is Android Studio. Like we talked about earlier, Android Studio is an integrated development environment for Android, and it's a tool for building Android applications. So it's definitely tool software. All right, and how about Figma? Figma is a tool for designing user interfaces. So again, it's definitely tool software. Okay, what about Docker? Now Docker is a tool for building, testing and deploying applications in an isolated environment. So again, it's definitely tool software. How about Microsoft Excel? Well, Microsoft Excel is something that you or I as users will interact with directly. It's not something that a developer will use to build software. It's something that we use to view and interact with data. So it's probably runtime software. What about Visual Studio Code? Well, Visual Studio Code is an example of an IDE or an integrated development environment, and it is a tool for building software. So it's definitely tool software. How about Postman? Postman is a tool for testing and debugging apps, and so it's definitely tool software. All right, what about Chrome? Well, Chrome is a web browser, and it is something that you or I as users will interact with directly. It's not a tool for building anything. It's something that we use to consume content. So it's probably runtime software. How about Redis? Well, Redis is a message broker, and it is a piece of infrastructure software that other software might depend on, but that you or I as users will probably never interact with directly. How about Bootstrap? Well, Bootstrap is a framework for building user interfaces, and so it's probably framework software. And then what about Slack? Well, Slack is a messaging application, and it is something that you or I as users will interact with directly. It's not a tool for building anything. It's not a piece of infrastructure. It's not a framework. It's something that we use to communicate with other people. So it's probably runtime software. All right. So at this point, I think we have 8 pieces of software, and they all seem to fall into the 4 categories that we talked about. So hopefully that was a fun little exercise. And that's it for me today. If you liked this video, please hit the thumbs up button below. And if you want to learn more about software, then check out this playlist right over here where I cover a bunch of beginner-friendly software topics. I'll see you in the next video.